This year's theme will really focus on land, material and people. How we both rebuild our relationship with the land, with those around us and with the materials we're going to be using as we try to make some of the biggest shifts that probably a generation has ever had to.
I don't think we're quite realising this is of a greater significance than World War II. This is magnitudes larger.
We simply do not have the carbon budget and the materials to build all the new homes that we're meant to be building.
We are here in the consequences and the wake of being out of proportional size with the planet, with each other. How do we practice moving into becoming right-sized?
We need to be imagining the future that can happen.
And all the different roles and responsibilities we're going to need when we undergo this quite profound economic and sociocultural change.
If the goal is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet, how would you think? Not what would you do, what are the policies, what are the answers, but how would you think?
Well, everyone, welcome to sunny Balsall Heath.
Welcome to Retrofit Reimagined in London at the Building Centre.
Welcome to our first talk today.
I just want to take this opportunity to welcome you all to CAT.
Thank you so much for coming and joining us in beautiful Glasgow.
And I also want to say hi to everybody on the live stream. Hello.
We're going to settle into just a little bit of context about why we're here and who we all are and what you can expect.
In 2020, there was this huge amount of money that came from the government, green grants, and it was all about retrofit, improving the material quality of our homes. There was no uptake. The money went back to central government because nobody wants safer, warmer, cheaper to run homes that are better for your health, that are better for your children, or neighbourhoods with cleaner air and better transport, more biodiverse and green front gardens. I was like, this doesn't make any flipping sense. What do you mean that there's no uptake? We started to realise, okay, there's many reasons to that low uptake. Different entanglements from across finance, from across governance, from across all of these different layers. Surely, if all the incredible community and neighbourhood organising on the ground doing amazing work, if they were activated in this story and they saw retrofit as a key part and site of imagination and possibility, surely we'd be in a different place.
What if the retrofit of our homes, communities, neighbourhoods, streets were led, governed, owned, designed, not by some government scheme, but were led by the community that live here? What if?
There's a cultural shift going on within architecture, construction and community groups now. They're not looking for that star architect to build a pinnacle, some glassy box in the middle of the city centre. They're looking for their homes to be saved. They're looking for their bills to go down.
We see housing as more of an asset or an accumulation of wealth than the necessity that it is. We don't see it as important as the need for food and water. When Maslow's hierarchy of needs states that basic shelter is something we all require to function as a human being.
We need desperately to do things differently. And I think that can only come from how can we reimagine our relationship with land, material and people.
We're going to hear from so many different ideas and propositions of what it meant when communities were able to design, they were able to finance, they were able to govern, they were able to own the land together.
My name is Abdurrahim Hassan. I am originally from a place called Somaliland. And I think the best way to describe my people is that we are people of the land. We have this belief that land and buildings and structures and space have rights over us.
In the 60s and 70s, they didn't need to knock down a lot of the houses that they did. They could have retrofitted them. It saved a hell of a lot of money. There was the opportunity right there to refurbish, train, and give people employable skills. I put retrofitting against gentrifying communities.
I really feel like we should change the culture about demolition and see it as something to be ashamed of. General demolition should be seen as a climate crime when it's really unnecessary and really just for the sake of profit, adding asset to property value developers.
Reimagining or retrofitting a building is not just in the kind of the materiality of that building, but actually about everything that happens around it. Without that intangible exchange, it's kind of all for nothing. Unless we're thinking about architecture and spaces as a way to challenge our assumption of what something should look like, I think it's very difficult to progress and to think about how things could look like.
We know retrofitting and making use of these buildings is just far better than throwing up new buildings. The reason that we created this as a living room space is because a living room is where people connect, you sit, you relax. It's where we kind of come together, and that's really what we want to create in our community, because from that, absolutely beautiful things can flow.
This is, I think, a beautiful quote, right? Indigenous people in Taiwan, what they say about actually their relationship with borrowing the materials from the river to give back. How do we have a different relationship with the world?
We have become more and more dysregulated because we've moved from the power and beauty of our traditional ecological knowledges. And I passionately believe that we root ourselves back in the land and the way it speaks to you and the way you build on the land and the way that the land can nurture you and the way it nurtures itself.
Our release of CO2 is a symptom of a much deeper problem. It's a problem with our relationship with the planet.
We need to create economies that actually work with the cycles of life.
Everyone talks about the energy we burn when we're heating our homes, but it's often forgotten about is the energy that goes into making our homes in the first place. Reducing the embodied carbon in our built environment is one of the major challenges in terms of meeting the climate emergency that we're in.
Why do I focus my work on the built environment as a source of climate action? It's because 38% of all the global emissions we have come from the built environment and the operation of buildings. 1/3 of all the energy we use on the planet is used in buildings.
We're actually going to bust our entire carbon budget in the UK by 2026.
Every single building that we build after 2026 is actually, it's colonisation again. It's looting and stealing from countries that need that carbon budget. And we've got the technology to not do this.
Our materials can be powered by the sun. And so this kind of retrofit revolution of both our homes, neighbourhoods and cities can be powered by the sun, not only for energy, but for the materials too.
By building with timber, we can actually lock that carbon away for a much longer time. But if it takes 60 years for us to grow a tree, we need to make sure that that timber is actually then being used for a full 60 years. Otherwise, the carbon that's locked up in that timber is then actually being wasted again.
What I spend most of my waking day doing is trying to think of ways to get the wood that is in our woodlands into products that people actually want to buy to put into buildings.
We don't want to be producing materials that are then sent off hundreds of miles and then shipped back. We want this process to actually generate local jobs, generate local infrastructure.
The most holistic and thoughtful visions are often coming from the people in our communities who are most rooted in local knowledge, most rooted in accountability. So there's a sort of integrity, I think, that comes from taking a very hyper-local scale, this scale of the neighbourhood. When funders or others try and impose these top-down frameworks on organisations working to build trust in communities, they can very quickly pollute trust-building conversations because that relationship that you're building with your neighbour becomes about data that you might need to get from them so that you know whether or not a particular financing model will work, and that polluting is very real.
Keeping information, trust, contractors, passion local is really important. What we want is these people to be advocates for retrofit in their community, neighbours telling neighbours positive news stories about retrofit.
We're making ourselves more comfortable, more money in our accounts because we're spending less on energy.
Not only are you using natural materials, it's a joy to work with. And all the builders that start using wood fibre and hemp and all that kind of thing, they all say the same things like, I would much prefer to use this.
Everybody who is having this done is a climate activist, making a small step towards ending the fossil fuel era.
I've lived in social housing for the majority of my life. Cockroaches, mice, damp, mould. We had lights filled with rainwater whenever it rained. We had a ceiling in the front room, it collapsed because of a leak. You could see daylight through the brickwork. I mean, it was absolutely slum conditions. We had a workman come in and describe it as not even fit for animals to live in. I knocked on every single home on my estate, people living in equally as bad, if not worse, conditions. People actually dying as a result of the poor conditions they were being subject to. Through no fault of their own, they happened to be a certain class and living in social housing.
I'm from an area called Tower Hamlets, which is one of the poorest parts of London. In the estate that I grew up in, just before the Blackwall Tunnel, the children who live still in that estate have 10% reduced lung capacity because of the tunnel. Areas that are dense, concrete jungles, if not regenerative or not designed in a way that is rooted in healing or liberation, can actually kill you, literally kill you.
What we find is that in urban environments, there is a chronic exposure to things like air, noise, light, and heat, these environmental factors that cause this stress response system to chronically engage and lead to a dysregulation. The only issue is that this system is helping mediate things like your immune system, your endocrine and your hormone system, as well as your metabolic system. These fundamental things that we need to live. Once you reimagine how you're actually framing an urban environment, you start to rethink the solutions.
We know there's a direct link, absolute direct link with health and housing. Cold housing, a drop of just 1 degree, we know we're going to see a rise in infant deaths and elderly deaths.
The NHS currently spends £1.4 billion a year because of poor housing. So we know that the way that our housing is and the way that it's managed, it currently does £1.4 billion of damage to our national health system every year. If you were to retrofit all those homes, it would pay itself back in 1 year.
The people who understand this most clearly are those on the ground who are experiencing it. We know that the biggest shifts in society come from the ground organising, and then everything else catches up, from the neighbourhood GPs and how they came around and how community libraries came around. Big stories that were huge what-ifs hundreds of years ago became what we understood as normal. With the power of all of these incredible demonstrators, the stories that are happening here, these are going to be inevitabilities, and we need to demonstrate the futures we want to be in.
When you give people ownership and you give them agency and you really see the best in them, people take it on and they take it to another level that you wouldn't expect. And if you want to create a movement which has its own momentum, this is the real key.
I lived in my bubble. That changed when I had my daughter, and you realise you need people. I've always dreamed of living in a communal space where you connect with your neighbours and you're part of each other's life.
I found it very, very powerful. That is not something that we are applying for individually. The area is improving as a community.
I'm starting to question now whether they don't understand the scale of this issue or they simply don't care. Why? Because it's not directly affecting them. And I mean, that comes down to representation in Westminster. I mean, there is no class diversity in there. How can we truly be representative of a nation and a country if we don't have everyone from different backgrounds sat at the table and giving their input? You get the right people around the table that have been affected and have lived experience, they will tell you how to fix it in the right way.
For me, what has been an issue has been the implementation. Thinking about homes, not units, and about people being at the center.
Let's go on tour. Go and partner and be alongside all of you to strengthen what happens next.
Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend upon the ideas that are lying around. But why would you just leave ideas lying around? Why wouldn't you have them actually up and running? Proof of practice in neighbourhoods, in towns, in cities, in businesses, in classrooms.
We need to make what we're talking about here much more accessible so that it's less about this happening here and other stuff happening there, but actually knitting them together.
We need to be growing the capacity in ourselves to navigate complexity, hold contradictions, and still be human with one another.
The sense of joy and solidarity that comes from being involved as we pop up in Birmingham or Bristol and now in Wales. Making all of those connections and the relationships, that's all kind of happening.
One of the best things for me is this whole thing that there are people who are bringing all our different communities together. The fact that we're sitting here, so many of us, it's very beautiful. And we're changing our lives.
We're fired up to change the system and make the system work for everyone.
When it comes to shifting behaviour, the only factor we can affect is how information is presented. How we slant it, how we project it has a massive impact. Creating new norms that are social, economic and cultural have a very big impact as well. Even more significant is creating the environments and infrastructures for people to imagine the future differently.
It takes a good story, a better story, to dislodge a story. And so those who tell the stories rule the world.
Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to tell a new story about what is possible, take it away from the passive idea of the future belongs to some remote decision makers, and to try and think, why don't we just go for it?
Look, let us see the challenge and be great enough to rise to the challenge.
What do we want to leave to that next generation of young people?
When things are moving so fast and so many things are being lost, it's about what do we retain and how do we come together, and we come together with heart, because when we feel invested in something, then we're involved in conserving something, in protecting something, in fighting for something.
These conversations are so important. We have to be reimagining what our future's got to be like, what it has to be like.
How can we make housing that actually enables everybody to thrive? Households that are actually built by the community, creating income and jobs and dignity that brings nature back, that actually generates that generosity of ecology in the way it's designed and built. Become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet.
Be more Moss-like. By making their world locally good, they do a huge global brilliance. They are small, and yes, they are insignificant, but in their masses they do extraordinary stuff. And I think if we could take one thing away, is that you cannot on your own change anything, but many of us can change a lot.
We're looking to work together to heal our collective intergenerational trauma. And I know that we can. There are so many different ways in which we've worked. There are so many different ways in which we've created festivals like today that are helping us build this. Having loads of conversations with loads of different people and like breaking out of different silos. Through those conversations, we are already doing that collective healing and building that capacity for us to be able to achieve this change.
As crises occur, people will look to ideas that aren't just lying around but are actually proven in practice. And this is how they will spread and scale.
I hope that as you go out of here, you'll retain this inspiration to do whatever it takes on your home, street, neighbourhood, community, to bring together people from many different backgrounds and really build. This is just the beginning of a journey. Big societal challenges and the places in which we live are huge sites of imagination, and we can bring all sorts of magic to them.